What is going on, YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the fourth album by rock band Modest Mouse. Basically, this project is called Good News for People Who Love Bad News, and it came out in the spring of 2004. Now, I remember this album from back in the day for the hit single Float On. Now, I remember this band from back in the day because of the hit single Float On. That was one that was played on like MTV and VH1 and stuff. I definitely remember the airplay of that particular music video and stuff. But I always kind of wondered what happened to this particular band. Didn't really catch the follow-up singles Ocean Breeze, Salty, and World. Didn't really catch the follow-up singles Ocean Breeze, Salty, and The World at Large that much, but I would have to say this is a pretty hit album. I do like the definite. This is a pretty hit album. I do like the alternative rock and kind of pub crawl kind of feel of this particular album. It has a lot of good gems on here. I would have to say it's not a full-blown classic, but this is an album that critics really liked. I would have to say it's kind of like a Thinkers, maybe not like a Thinkers, but just kind of like a more critic rave kind of album. You know how sometimes that happens like with Mumford and Sons or folks like that just the critic type stuff is higher than the actual publicity of like casual fare. But for the most part, I kind of like, a lot of people seem, for the most part, Modest Mouse is kind of seen as like a one-hit wonder just because of Float On and that type of stuff. But I do definitely think they have other hits, and Ocean Breeze, Salty actually did hit like almost the top 5 of the alternative rock charts. So that's pretty good to kind of have that happen. This is an album that went almost 2 times platinum by 2006, a good 2 years later. So it's kind of the concept that it did have like some kind of sleeper kind of appeal as far as that kind of went. I just kind of like this band. I wanted to see what was up with them just to see how the rest of the album fared, just me remembering, just having fond memories of Float On and that type of stuff. This is a good kind of boppish kind of one to kind of have, and there are some other good moments on here. I mean, I can see like, I do think apart from Ocean Breeze, Salty, that's the only real other song that holds a candle to Float On in terms of riff catchiness and just overall melodic kind of fanfare and just stuff like that, as far as like the riffs and the hooks and the melodies and that type of stuff, I would have to say. But it's not to say this is a bad album. It's just not an immediate album. It's just kind of one that you have to kind of vibe with a little bit and already have the vibe going, more so than one that kicks it off and that sort of thing. I just would have to kind of suppose that it's a good album, but it's kind of more of like a slow burn kind of sleeper of a project that just kind of like, hey, what's this? When you hear it, this is kind of like an album after it's been on for like 45-50 minutes. You're kind of like, okay, well, what is this, as opposed to just like, hey, I need to know that song. It's not to say this is a bad album. It's going to get a pretty decent score, but not like a super rave score, but it is good. So I just would have to say there's 3 singles on this particular album. The first single was Float On. The first single is Float On, and this is kind of like a solid late day makeshift malaise of a song, I would have to say. It's got some good riffage, and it's just a catchy and marketable single, I would have to say. This is just a really nice one. This has a real malaise. The song just has a real malaise kind of feel about it. Just really like the kind of catchy kind of alternative, just really like the catchy kind of alternative rock kind of riffs on this particular song. It's basically like the album's best song. I just would have to say. It's not to say that this is a bunk album, but this is just one. This Float On is the song with the most distinction, the most affability, and just pretty much like the best riffage. Not to say that there's not other riffs on here, but this is like the most pretty much overall marketable, and just overall one that just has the most kind of commercial ready type fanfare as far as that kind of happens. Just the one that I do think probably belonged on MTV and VH1 and places like that as far as that kind of happens. Just would have to say I do think Ocean Breeze, Salty is a good follow-up, but it just didn't quite have like the overall catchy kind of melodies and just distinction overall, just like a compact kind of snappy kind of single as far as that kind of happens. It just was like perfect little vibe. This is too bad that Modest Mouse couldn't, you know, get other songs to equal it. It's too bad that Modest Mouse couldn't get other songs to equal it, but it's not like this album is bunk, so just know that. But the second single is Ocean Breeze, Salty, and this is a pretty good single. I do like the catchiness of it. It just doesn't have like the overall sheer marketability of Float On, but it is pretty close. It's a warranted kind of one, and it did hit number 6 on the alternative rock charts, I would have to say. So this is just kind of like a swash, kind of gloomy pier and summer malaise of a song, I would have to say. And by pier, I mean like beach pier, like out in California and places like that. This would have to say some good summer malaise, and this is just kind of a good ghoulish ruminating type tune. So it's interesting. This kind of reminds me of Ghostfire a little bit, that they're a band that I've been reviewing recently, some stuff like that. Just kind of some swash kind of after hours, just kind of some swashed and kind of moody kind of summer pitches as far as that kind of happens. This one's just a little bit more malaise than Float On, but it just doesn't have like the overall snappiness. This one's just a little bit more of like a mid-tempo kind of down, low mid-tempo kind of tune as far as that kind of happens. But it's just, I like the ghoulish kind of feel about it. It was just interesting that Modest Mouse kind of did this sort of thing, so I wasn't expecting that kind of vibe from them, but it is a pretty nice pitch to kind of have. It's marketable. It's pretty much second best song. Just would have to say it's got a real good feel about it overall, but it just doesn't have like the overall catchiness, probably in the chorus. I'd say the chorus is probably the thing that some of these songs that Modest Mouse kind of does, like the singles like The World at Large and Ocean Breeze, Salty, don't really have like a definitive kind of hook like Float On kind of does. And I think that kind of damned them somewhat, because I think if Ocean Breeze Salty would have had a better hook on here, it probably would have lasted a little bit better. But this is kind of more of like extenuated verses and just kind of like a kind of bleeding into like one Ocean Breeze Salty and the world at large kind of ebb into each other as far as that kind of happens. But it's just a good concept to kind of get. It's just the fact that it just doesn't have that distinct kind of snappy hook, but it is a pretty good song. Second best song on the album, I would have to say. And then The World at Large is the third single, and for me this is kind of an almost song. This is like a glazed kind of evening workaday vibes that this song has, and it's just a stretching kind of introspective kind of blaze. But the thing about this song, it just is not quite as full-blown catchy, because I just think it needed like a chorus that just would have been definitive. I don't know why I'm not really sure why Modest Mouse didn't go for more snappy kind of radio ready choruses and just kind of have that better distinction as far as something that could just be like a definitive kind of earworm of like a song or something like that. I mean, I feel like both Ocean Breeze Salty and The World at Large just didn't really, like I was saying before, they just didn't really nail it in that sort of chorus compactness. But the production work is great. The band work is pretty excellent. I would even say that the melodies are pretty good on here. It just lacks that complete compelling chorus that just knocks your socks off. I would say Float On is just the best song, but Ocean Breeze Salty is a good follow-up. The World at Large is like an almost song for me, just because it's kind of distinct, but it's almost somewhat grating, just because the verses, the melodies and the verses are just the same the whole song through, and there's not really a distinct chorus. That's kind of the concept that detracts from it. But it's a decent song. It's kind of a swash, kind of glazed evening type one that kind of works. But this is not as definitive, but it's a decent song. So I just would say that's an almost song for me. So that's kind of the concept about it. There's 16 songs on this particular album, and minus like the 3 interludes and skits, that would narrow it down to 13. And out of those 13, I wound up recommending to you 6.5. So it's exactly half the album I would have to recommend. But these 6.5 songs would be Float On, Ocean Breeze Salty, Bury Me With It, Dance Hall, Satin in a Coffin, The View, and the almost song is The World at Large. So basically, like some of these good ones, there are some pretty good snappy kind of ones that do compete with Float On in terms of like the affability and like a night venue. I do feel like Float On is like a pretty good peppy kind of night venue tune to kind of have, and just like a good kind of after hours haze as far as that kind of happens. It's not just like some summer kind of car makeshift, but it's also like a decent kind of mid-tempo kind of venue rumbler as far as just having like some drinks in your system. But another one that's really good for that is Bury Me With It. This is another one that's really good for that is Bury Me With It. This is kind of a paced grunge like mid-tempo bubbler, I would have to say. It's got a rave hook on there, and it's just a nice house party thump of a song, I would have to say. So this is kind of one that just has a lot of snap on this particular one. It's a lot of good rave energy. I feel like Bury Me With It and Dance Hall are two of the most energetic songs on the album. They just kind of have like a different pitch from Modest Mouse. Despite the fact that they may be seen as like a one-hit wonder, doesn't mean that they don't have other good songs. They're just not as distinct in like a single format. But they do have some other bubblers on here, some nice kind of mid-tempo and kind of good night venue, evening venue, kind of pub crawl type stuff, and this kind of house party type stuff. I definitely feel like Bury Me With It's a house party type gem. But I feel like Dance Hall is kind of like a just like coffee shop, something like that, where you'd hear music, that sort of thing. Just like a good place like that. Dance Hall is just a nice kind of evening venue rumbler. Dance Hall is just like a nice evening venue rumbler, I would have to say. The energy is really rave on this song. So the guy who does this song is just really rave in his energy pitch as far as I kind of have. It's really like to feel that particular one. But the beat is pretty steadfast. The beat is just a steadfast jumper, I would have to say. So it's just an overall nice one. Really like the compactness. It's really like the compactness of this particular song, and it just hit pretty heavily. So it's just a nice one. A lot of good rave energy on there. Satin in a Coffin's another one. Satin in a Coffin's another one that can keep up with Dance Hall and Bury Me With It, I would have to say. This one's just a good evening out, have a few drinks kind of cut, I would have to say. It's just got a steady pace, and it's just got a good sense of jive, I would have to say. So this is kind of a nice kind of thumping kind of one. Definitely like the riveting energy. There's just some good, fantastic production work when Modest Mouse steps out, and I had the feeling that they would kick ass like this just based upon the concept of how catchy Float On kind of was. I knew that they probably had more hit songs than just that one, and Ocean Breeze Salty, I just would have to say. It's just a good concept to get some of these, just seeing the fact that they kind of remind me of like a more alternative rock type sense of Maroon 5 or some folks like that, or Death Cab for Cutie, something like that. They step out more than Death Cab does, but they're not quite as, I mean, I feel like Adam Levine and Maroon 5 have more like furor of energy, but I do feel like they have some good alternative rock type feels. It was kind of the stuff that grunge was doing back in the early 90s, just in a more kind of mid-tempo kind of pub crawl type feel as far as that kind of happens for 2004 and 5 and stuff. Just I would say some good concepts there. And then another good venue highlight would be The View. This is definitely like a snappy kind of mid-paced dance gem, I would have to say. This is pretty much like a dance song. This is pretty good with like Float On and I would say Satin in a Coffin, definitely. This is like a similar gem, like I was saying, this is a similar gem to Float On. It's just a good outing and social glaze of a song, I would have to say. It's just an overall, probably one of the best songs on the album. All six of these songs that I recommend, and in some cases the almost song, but all six of the songs I full blown recommend have some sort of outing kind of snap. All six of the songs I full blown recommend have some sort of outing sense about them and just a good sense of evening jive and stepping out kind of fair as far as it kind of happens. They're a fun band. They definitely have the feel about it. It's just the fact that apart from this particular strength, they don't have like a lot of other strengths. And they needed probably some more song versatility as far as single formats. But those are the 6.5 songs I recommend. So talk about some of these songs I don't recommend. Most of these other songs on here, like there's some songs on here like Blame It on the Taytons and Black Cadillacs, One Chance, and The Good Times Are Killing Me. A lot of these are just pretty sleepy, kind of dreary type songs that just don't really fit that well. A lot of these are just really sluggish kind of vibes that just kind of feel just a lot more kind of ambient in a bad sense. I just feel like some of these just don't really work that well. And This Devil's Workaday is just kind of like a bouncy kind of song that just didn't hit that heavily. That one just kind of had some awkward productions on there that just didn't really fit. And then Bukowski was another one that was just kind of an awkward one. And then Bukowski was just kind of another awkward one. So the thing about this album is about half the album hits, but I'm going to go ahead and give the score just a little bit of a raised feel about it, just because I did like the feeling as far as when this album did hit, it did hit. So me basically recommending 6.5 songs out of 13 on this particular album. I'm going to go ahead and give this album like a 5.75 out of 10. Not quite a 6, but I would have to say it's good enough, but it's just kind of a little bit above middle of the road, but it just had a lot of impairing kind of songs that prevented it from being like a true full-blown classic. I like the feel of some of this stuff. I just feel like these more kind of sluggish type moments just didn't work out for them. I think they definitely needed some better kind of single writing as far as that kind of happens for just the snap towards the radio. And definitely it's just kind of odd that the other two singles, Ocean Breeze Salty, and then The World at Large, just didn't have better snap as far as that kind of went with the choruses in terms of the marketability towards the radio as far as that kind of went. They kind of damned themselves by not doing that, but I just would have to say that's kind of the concept. So the social score as a result, I'm going to give the social score like a 6.75 out of 10. I feel like it's almost like a 7. It has some good snap on here. About half the album has some riveting kind of feels as far as that kind of goes, but it just lacks the immediate kind of feel. This album just lacks the immediate kind of feel and just doesn't have the overall impact to Float On for the most part. I feel like Ocean Breeze Salty is at least a decently worthy follow-up, but for the most part, when trying to recommend this to others, it just doesn't have that overall draw as far as trying to have that particular vibe. It just doesn't have that particular drive as far as trying to make that happen. So I just would have to say, as far as that kind of goes, just 6.75, almost, just above average, just solid enough, but just still kind of somewhat lacking, I would have to say. In terms of the future, like Modest Mouse doesn't oftenly put out albums. They've only really put out 3 albums since 2004, this particular album. So the last album they dropped was in the summer of 2021, but before that they dropped in like 2007 and 2015. Just would have to say they do have some other projects, and I'm almost curious what some of them kind of sound like, but this is a pretty definitive one. I did recommend it, but it's just kind of more just a hair or two above middle of the road, but there is some decent stuff looking towards that if you can look past that sort of thing.